Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, DataSec Ops, what it is and how it keeps your data secure and compliant. Before we get started, I just wanted to go through a few quick housekeeping items. Please note that your console is fully customizable. You can expand or collapse any of the modules. Please drop your questions for the presenter in the questions section, and he will be answering them at the end of the presentation. If you have a question or need support, please visit the resources section and contact Event Support. This webinar will be available on demand beginning later today for the next 2 weeks, and you'll be able to use the same link to join and watch at your convenience. With that, I'm thrilled to welcome Ben Hertzberg, Chief Scientist at Satori and author of Snowflake Security, Securing Your Snowflake Data Cloud. Today, he's joining us to explain how Satori created the first DataSecOps platform, which streamlines data access by automating access controls, security, and compliance for the modern data infrastructure. We'll focus on the key elements and benefits of DataSecOps, why you should implement DataSecOps in your organization, the key industries that can benefit, how a robust DataSecOps platform can ensure your data is secure and compliant, and predictions for 2022 and beyond. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ben. Take it away.
All right. Hi, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and welcome to today's session where we'll speak about DataSecOps. My name is Ben. I'm a DataSecOps guy. I have a wife and 3 children. I live in Tel Aviv, Israel, and I really like traveling around the world. At least pre-COVID. I'm also a co-author of Snowflake Security by Apress and Apress of Springer, which was out a couple of months ago for anyone dealing with Snowflake, the Snowflake Data Cloud, as data engineers or security engineers or anyone else. And currently, I'm Chief Scientist at Satori, the DataSecOps platform, and then let's get started speaking about DataSecOps. So just before I start, I also want to say that all the images, the nice images in this slideshow, I took from Pixabay, which is always recommended as a source of photos and images. So what are we going to talk about today? Today we're going to talk about DataSecOps. What is it? Why do we need this? And what are the ingredients of a DataSecOps platform? For instance, when we built Satori, the DataSecOps platform, what drove us towards what we've done, and why did we do that? And then some more stuff like what are the predictions of what's going to happen with DataSecOps, etc. So this would be a good session. If you learn more about, or if you haven't heard of DataSecOps, if you learn at all that there is such a thing, DataSecOps, what the principles of DataSecOps is, and what were our considerations where we were creating a DataSecOps platform, like what were companies looking to achieve by using a DataSecOps platform. Okay, and we have a lot to cover, so let's start. Okay, so I will probably, looking at the people who sign up for this webinar, this will not come as a shock that data is exploding. You could pick, like a myriad of different statistics to show, like the amount of data being stored or processed, or the cloud migration of data, etc., etc. But it all looks like this, right? There's a huge growth, explosive growth in the amount of data stored in the world, in the amount of data that is moving to the cloud, amount of people within organizations that are touching data, processing data, making value out of data, making insights out of data. And there's also growth in the complexities of managing data with more Privacy Act, Data Protection Act, regulation, compliance, and other things like that makes it complex to manage data access at scale. So, everybody wants value from data. If a couple of decades ago, it was like there was a vault of data or a warehouse in the back room of the organization where you would get the data, and only like a chosen few would get through. We went from there to BI teams accessing data, and you had data professionals dealing with the data and getting more than just looking at the history, but also making more reporting, and data scientists making predictions to the future, and a lot of additional data use. But now everybody wants value from data. It's not just data analysts, not just data scientists in the traditional sense. It's also folks who are from customer success, sales operations, marketing operations. A lot of data professionals and non-data professionals are analyzing data around a lot of organizations. And that's pretty cool because it leads to innovation, and lots of great stuff is happening from data democratization and from use of data, but it also brings complexities. Well, there was a slide going on for a millisecond there. So to get all this data-driven value in businesses, you would say, of course, it's in the context, I would say that there's a data operations that needs to happen to make data available, accessible to the data consumers within the organization, to share data between teams, to create ETLs, ELTs, etc. It became an operation, a data ops, rather than something that happens ad hoc. There's like a central database that only a certain team touches. Now it's not like that. There's an operation around data, and a lot of teams have access to a lot of data, and that's pretty cool. Again, making a lot of value from data, but that's also something that creates complexities, because data is now, it's a wild horse. It's harder to control. It's harder to govern, to make sure that data keeps moving. Someone takes something, clones it, does some processing, leaves it there. A lot of teams are accessing the data. People need data for a project, then they enrich the data, then they don't, no one asks, okay, please revoke my access when they no longer need it. So data is living, okay, and a living creature like that keeps on moving and changing is harder to control. So sensitive data, especially, it's not like the crown jewels that you can place all your controls around one specific location, and that there you have the sensitive data like your PII, PHI, etc. It's something that moves. It's something that you find sensitive data all of a sudden in a semi-structured data that came from an event system, that came from your website for debugging, but contains all of a sudden customer emails, etc. Data is getting hard to control, and there are more risks around data. And I hope you appreciate the photos that I haven't taken, but I've chosen, like this one. So there are more risks around your data. There are more security risks around your data. Why? Because when you allow more people within your organization and sometimes outside of your organization to analyze data, that increases the security risks around data, of data exposure, and such risks. There are more compliance risks because there's more compliance around data, and data, once it changes, it creates also compliance risks. For example, you have an audit, and you know where you don't know where your sensitive data is, or you think you know that where your sensitive data is, but it's what you have, the inventory you have is updated to the last month. But when you have the audit, you have that that semi-structured events that coming in, and you may fail audits or may put yourself under other compliance risks. There's more privacy risk because there's more privacy acts and regulations. So the data is an asset, but it's also a bigger liability in terms of privacy. And there's greater operational risks as well, because when more people are accessing data, as they are today in most organizations, this also creates an operational risk. Some of these people are not tech savvy and are not fluent around what can cause operational issues, like scanning lots of data. And some of them think that they are, but they're really not, which is the riskiest part. So there are more risks around data, and the data keeps on changing. There are more regulations, more risks. So it's interesting times. And it reminded me, and not only me, it reminded us of DevOps. And we thought that that we can learn a lot from DevOps, from the move of applications to the cloud and the resulting new operational model around DevOps. Something can be learned around this for data ops as well, for data operations as well. So basically, when applications started moving to the cloud, some of the tech drivers were cloud elasticity, which is now true for data, of course, with all the cloud data warehouses and data lakes and data warehouses, data lakehouses, data clouds, all of these things that are driving data to the cloud because it's easy to store data at the cloud, query it, analyze it, process it. So the same happened with applications. The move to CI/CD in the DevOps era, the move to incremental changes. You don't release like a big version every quarter or every year. You keep changing your application, and now data is the same. There are a lot of organizations with very small iterations in changes of data, and the notion that you can fail fast and innovate. That was a strong theme around DevOps, and it's also strong around data ops right now. So there was this infinite cycle of DevOps, from designing a project until you monitor it after you release it, and this keeps on flowing. And when we as the industry moved to DevOps, there were a lot of issues as well. For example, organizations moved from legacy software development to a DevOps deployment of products as a team. There was a DevOps team that would take the software from the developers and put it in production, but not as a mindset. And then the developers were still in a world where they have all the time in the world to fix security issues, for example, before release, but the software is released every day or every week, and there's no time freeze where you can fix security stuff. So if you fix them once every quarter, it may be too late. You may have introduced vulnerabilities as well. And we see that the same with data ops. Sometimes data travels fast, changes fast. Data projects require fast movement, and the only people who are in the data ops mindset are if the only people that are in the right mindset around privacy, around compliance, around security, are like a few data engineers, then it won't cut it. It's not. It needs to be something that's a state of mind that's shared by all the data stakeholders. There were a lot of issues with misconfigurations and change management, and that, of course, is true also to the move of data to the cloud, and the cost of security as a patch, as in not having security as part of the entire process, can be very high, of course, both in applications and data, which means that security has to be bolted into the process. So that was true to the move of applications to the cloud. It's also true to about the move of data analytics to the cloud. And some of the ways the software development moved to DevOps was tackling that, which we can learn from, are the shift to the left, for example, which means you do more testing, more security testing, and more security awareness around the left, where the developers are developing data. So we can learn from that to data operations as well, to add security tests and security automations, and make sure that access controls are also enforced in the development environment, the staging environment, for example, making incremental changes, continuous changes, not one security audit once a year and let's fix everything, but small incremental changes to reduce risk. A lot of focus on automation, because small teams are managing a lot of applications, or in our case, small teams are managing a lot of data, and the security must be embedded into the entire process. So basically, DevOps versus DevSecOps means that that security is a first-class citizen in the software publishing cycle, in the DevOps cycle, and it needs to be the same in data ops as well, in organizations that are data-driven, which are, if you ask most organizations, everybody is data-driven now. So now let's focus on data ops and DataSecOps and the key elements of DataSecOps. So DataSecOps is an agile, holistic, and security-embedded approach. So it's agile, it's holistic, as in everything is part of DataSecOps. Everything around data is part of DataSecOps. The data consumers, for example, has to be they have to be educated, for example, about risks of data exposure and other risks. And security embedded means that the security is not is part of the entire process. When there's a data project, it needs to involve security teams, for example, from the get-go. To coordination of the ever-changing data that keeps on changing, and its users, the data consumers, the data producers, the data stakeholders, they keep changing. As in, Ben is a data scientist. Ben requires access today to something. Tomorrow, he may not need that. Ben, may not need that access, but he may need access to something else. So everything is very fluid, and that needs to be coordinated. It's very continuous. You can't just have a check once every month, or if we're not speaking about users, for example, if we're speaking about where do you have sensitive data, you can't just check this once a year and say, okay, this is where I have all of my sensitive data. I have it here and there and in that data warehouse and in the other one, because it may change the next day. And the goal of DataSecOps is to deliver quick data to value, meaning that security also needs to understand that if the process will be rigid, as in it will take a lot of time for people to get access to data, for example, then the business will lose. So everybody needs to work together to make it work, right? While keeping data private, safe, and well governed. All right, so let's discuss some of the like the mindset behind DataSecOps, or what we need to keep in mind. So first of all, it's the fact that when we have more people from the organization and sometimes from outside the organizations, touching the data, processing the data, analyzing the data, making machine learning models of the data, insights, etc., then this increases the risk. It's something that's a given. The more people touch the data, the more risk you have. Of course, this risk needs to be mitigated and taken care of. But that's part of the mindset. The second part of the mindset is that the data engineering teams, as well as the security teams, are small teams handling a lot of data and data changes and data access changes. And they need to be efficient at what they do. They need to drive data, which is fuel to the business. They need to drive it to the business, and they need to focus. But we must keep in mind that in most cases, it's small teams that handle a lot of work, and that DataSecOps, or the act of keeping the data secure and private, it shouldn't significantly slow down time to value, because otherwise you lose. In the business sense of the word, you lose. You can't be slow and still win, or it will reduce your chances of winning. But you shouldn't compromise on security. So that's the balance you should have. You should be as quick as possible, but still secure. That requires a lot of collaboration from different teams, from data engineering, from security, from data governance, from all the data stakeholders, and it requires some thinking of how can we build the processes that can drive it. For example, if we have clear deterministic security policies, we can not waste time when Ben asks for data. We can know instantaneously, Ben, you're not getting this data, or Ben, you are getting this data. And as we like to say, it's a team sport. It's everybody's business. If the business gains from data, it's everybody wins. But if something bad happens, it's everybody's loss. So everybody needs to be well educated around data and security and the risks around data. There can be data champions, security champions, DataSecOps champions within the teams. There can be a lot of things to drive it, but this needs to be a holistic approach. Our company is making money, making value out of data. This is what we do. We're a data company, and a lot of companies are now, at least to some extent, a data company. So that means that we have great assets, but also great liabilities. So the principles of DataSecOps, the corresponding principles, I would say, that are driven by the mindset is that security needs to be continuous as part of the data operations, not something that comes as an afterthought, but something that is part of the entire data operations process, from design to monitoring. And there needs to be very close collaboration between the teams. And in the companies that had such collaboration, when they moved to DevOps, they had good success around keeping the process safe. And we need to do that in data as well. Whenever something is an ad hoc process, it's probably a good idea to think how you can make it continuous to match the rate of changes in data. So, for example, if you are scanning your privileges for users once every year, or once every quarter to revoke access from people who no longer need this access. And if you're doing this once a quarter, you're in a good spot. You should think about changing that to perhaps self-service data access, or something that when you're getting access, you're also getting time to live on that access, and that's important. Also, around scanning for sensitive data, you need to always know where your sensitive data is, and not once a year, right? And there are other examples. Something that needs to that is not always happening in around data analytics is the separation of environments, staging environment, production environment, and automation around that, and around tests that test the security as well. For example, that they're testing that public users, when they're getting sensitive data, it is always masked, and for instance. And prioritization is key, because it's small teams that handle a lot of things. You should focus on the sensitive data, obviously, on the crown jewels, or whatever cliche we want to call it, but you should focus on the sensitive data, which means that it's very important to know where the sensitive data is. Make sure the data is clearly owned. You don't want to have data warehouses where you have tables and databases where this is from some project that no one maintains anymore, and no one knows who's responsible for that data. You want everything to be as deterministic as possible, and you want to have a very simple and deterministic data access. If Ben asks for data, then maybe for some data I can get instant access to that data as long as I provide the business justification, and that's great. Then you save time and you don't increase the risk if I would get that access to data anyways. But if I'm not supposed to get access to data, then I shouldn't be getting it at any time. It's not like if I'm opening an IT ticket on Sunday, I will get the access, but on Tuesday I will not. And fine-grained security as well. For example, I should be able to get the data, and I should be able to view phone numbers because that's part of my role in the organization, but I shouldn't be able to see the salary expectations, or each data and the rules. So basically, it's DataSecOps. You can call it something else, right? But it's the data operation that is embedded with security that is really carrying your data-driven value to your data teams, and to which are across the organization. It can be to your customer success engineers who are analyzing data to find out how to retain all of your customers, or to sales, whatever. But you need a DataSecOps platform, mindset, processes to make sure that everything is fast, secure, and is in line with how data is moving, how fast data is moving and changing. So the three industries that we see benefiting most from DataSecOps are finance, because they have a lot of sensitive data and they are highly regulated, but they also must innovate all the time to win. It's healthcare, especially health tech, because they have a lot of sensitive data. And again, especially with health tech companies that are innovating in this field and are doing great stuff, they need to keep a lot of regulations, but they also need to make value of the data. Otherwise, you don't need it, right? But they do need it. So it's a challenge how to really innovate with data fast without exposing it. And a lot of different technology companies, especially fast-moving unicorns and other hyper-growth companies that are doing things where at some point everybody sort of has access to things, and then you have to move to a need to know basis, and you need to keep better track of who's accessing data and where your sensitive data, etc. And then you benefit from DataSecOps platform. But really, it can be many different industries. Some are quote unquote old school companies, but they're still doing great stuff with data, and wasting a lot of time on the complexities of managing data and managing access to data and managing security over data, etc. So now the fun part of what were our considerations when building a DataSecOps platform, and let's discuss that for a while. So it started by speaking with a lot of different companies in those three sectors and in others that are heavy data users, and with a lot of very smart people, to understand what are people looking for in a DataSecOps platform. And if you remember this photo, something that was coming up a lot is that organization needs faster time to value, because their data engineering becomes a bottleneck when you need to give access to people and set masking policies and role level security policies and ABAC, and it takes a lot of time, and they need faster time to value. That's something that organizations need a platform to handle for them. It's to get higher engineering productivity, because at the time that the data engineering organizations in some cases are heavily occupied with tickets of people who need access to data and requirements of let's set a view that will only allow certain restricted data to show, etc. They are not doing other things. So that is another need. We had to build a platform that would reduce the overhead of engineering, specifically data engineering, and let them be happier, but also more productive. More compatibility, for example, and this is something that keeps coming up, organizations that need to know where they have sensitive data continuously, and they're not happy with doing that once a year. They know that it's not cutting it anymore, and they need to know that, and they need to know who is accessing data and who is accessing specific data about data subject, etc., etc. So all these different capability, compliance, compatibility requirements, and security compatibility requirements is something that requires a DataSecOps platform or a DataSecOps solution. Whoa. And in many cases, the operational complexity is a big problem, where things are starting to get very complex, and adding a dynamic masking policy, for example, may take days to implement because of different complexities, and complexities can cause operational data loss and data quality degrading, and many things like that. So that is something that you would need. And the complexities are obscuring your way to getting value from the data. So, for example, you need visibility to know where your sensitive data is, who's accessing it, how is it being used. And you need better security around how do I, across all of my data, set granular access controls and identify threats and classify all of my data, know where it is, what types of data, etc. So that was part one, to understand what companies need from such a DataSecOps platform, which can be our platform, which can be built in a different way, which can be built by the organization. It all depends on the situation. And then we boiled it down to the main capabilities that organizations need around that. So first of all, it's continuous data discovery and classification. And it's funny, well, not funny, haha, but funny to see how sensitive data keeps popping up in places you do not expect it to be at, in some semi-structured JSON thing that was pushed to a data for analyzing something completely different, but it's there. So knowing where sensitive data is and acting upon it, sometimes sending it to the organizational data catalogs or data governance team, sometimes having it as a continuously updated data inventory, but knowing where it is as it is in there, as it's being accessed, for example. Dynamic masking is something, is a strong capability that many of our customers require. The ability not to duplicate each data set for each specific anonymity requirement, but to be able to simplify the act of serving different anonymized parts of the data set to different groups, identities, users. So that's something that's a strong part of a DataSecOps platform. And in general, granular data access policies such as ABAC, attribute-based access control, for example, that a user can access data but only under certain conditions from certain locations, from certain clients. For example, you can access the data using Looker, but you can't access that through Python because it creates different risks and challenges. So that's something that organizations tend to require as a capability from a DataSecOps platform. Customized access workflows to simplify all of these, the processes of granting access. So as we said, let's have a deterministic security policy, but now let's enforce it. So if Ben can access data and all he needs to do for that is say, okay, this is why I need it, let's automate it and not waste everybody's time, and give Ben temporary access when he asks for it, and provide the business justification. And if he needs an approval, let's run this workflow, etc., etc. But let's do it quick. Let's not waste data engineering time. That's something else that was required as a capability from a DataSecOps platform. And lastly, reporting and compliance. Specifically, I would say the most popular requirements are who has access to sensitive data, who is accessing my sensitive data, and where do I have sensitive data, where do I have new sensitive data is something that organizations like to know and report on, and who's touching. Sometimes there are more specific requirements like different types of sensitive data, or if someone is looking for specific data subject information. But all of these things, to have them in one place, that's something that's required from a DataSecOps platform. And building a platform that will allow for that. So we drill down and we think about what are the must-haves of a DataSecOps platform around visibility. What do we need to see? We need to see what data requests are sent, queries, and what data is returned, and the usage analytics, etc. Around security, we need to be able to prevent access to sensitive data, for example. We need to secure objects inside different data stores. We need to be able to provide masking and anonymization of data on the fly, and create workflows around allowing access to data and around new sensitive data, and around all of that. And everything needs to be with a strong integration to the rest of the data ops, with APIs, with Terraform, etc. So basically, once we knew what we're going to do, why are we doing it, the question was, okay, so how do we implement it? And there are several ways to do that. And of course, the answer is not always the same for all organizations, but basically, let's talk about where do you place all of these controls? Where do you place the controls around accessing data? And to the right, you have your data consumers. Imagine 300 of those, not just one or 30 or 3,000. To the right, you have your data in your data warehouses, your data lakes, your databases. So, and the data consumers are accessing data. To the further left, there's the ETLs and where data comes in. But this is a very simplistic view. And you have the different data stakeholders that needs to manage all of this, and the different that's down there. And up above, it's it's part of a data stack. So a DataSecOps platform needs to communicate with data catalog, with identity providers, etc. So there are several approaches about where to replace controls. It can be with agents or drivers on the data consumers, but this we felt is not a very modern approach. No one likes installing agents or replacing drivers. It's a lot of operational overhead, and there are a lot of problems around it and pitfalls. So that wasn't even a remote possibility. There are native capabilities of data stores to use, but what we didn't like about this approach or the approach of orchestrating those native capabilities at scale is that you create a differentiation between your implementation in different technologies. Not always do you have all the same capabilities, and in many cases it requires adding, for example, abstractions in the data stores, and that's something that we did not like. And in addition, and perhaps the most important thing is, it does not give us visibility into the data that is moving. We cannot, for example, identify sensitive data as it travels, as it is in traffic, and we cannot enforce anything. We have to rely on sending an API call for something else to enforce blocking. So the method we decided on was to do a reverse proxy in between, that where you don't need any credentials in our platform or anything like that. You only go to your data through our proxy, and that is the approach we wanted, so that it will be the least intrusive and with the highest value that can be given. And so in the left, you have the data stores, those and others that you are connecting to, and to the right, you have all the clients, these and the rest of them that you are using, and the DataSecOps platform sits in the middle. A couple of examples of users, for example, Wealthsimple, Canada's biggest fintech, is using it to protect sensitive data in their Amazon Redshift clusters, and to enforce different types of access according to the sensitivity of the data. So it can be implemented without changing all of the definitions within the existing clusters, etc. And the security can be implemented as policies by Satori or Innovaccer, health tech unicorn, one of the biggest, and it's around engineers and others who access data across many different types of data stores, and you need control over that. You need to apply access, you need to apply row level security, you need to apply masking and other restrictions over data. and without changing those hundreds of different places and technologies where data is kept. Sorry. So last, I will mention some predictions for 2022, and I don't like predictions because it's you have to be very generic about it. One is tactical. I think that more organizations are moving to multi-cloud and multi-platform and super clouds, and they will need to address that as part of their data security, DataSecOps architecture. So that is one. And the other is that organizations are in a transition. Well, not all of them, obviously, but overall, a lot of organizations are moving and will move from a default to no security model. Of course, not all organizations are in a default to know, but to a need to know. So many organizations will grow to a point where they need to enforce need to know policies, but they need to do it fast. They don't need to do it in old school ways. And then many organizations will move beyond that, from need to know to a need to share, to realizing that the number one priority of the organization is to share data within the organization and make use of it, and security comes as a mitigation on top of that. So thank you for listening. You can read more about DataSecOps and about what Satori does, and we have also specific security guides for different data technologies. You can go to satoricyber.com to the resources section, and you can also visit our blog, where we have a lot of content around data security, data engineering, DataSecOps. And feel free to keep in touch. These are my details. And if you are, by the way, a data engineer or part of a team that is managing access to Snowflake, I do have some Snowflake security free copies that I can give away. So just keep in touch, and I can send you a free one, or you can, of course, order it off Amazon or any other online store, Kindle or physical copy. So that's about that. And last but not least, you are free to also and invited to go to satoricyber.com and click on the test drive. There you can start experimenting with our DataSecOps platform and give it a try and see how it dynamically masks data and how you can do it. It's like a guided tour where you can enjoy it. You don't need to connect your own data stores. You can do it with our test drive data stores, or you can connect your own and enjoy that as well. I hope you had fun, and if we have time for questions, then that's the time, I think.